Some warnings don't come with sirens. Sometimes they arrive folded inside an ordinary dinner bill. Claire Bennett kept her breathing steady as she crossed the polished oak floor of Bella Rosa, the kind of Manhattan restaurant where crystal glasses caught the glow of candlelight and every whispered conversation sounded expensive. She balanced a leather check presenter in one hand, her smile calm enough to fool anyone watching, but her pulse refused to slow. 30 seconds earlier, she had noticed something no one else seemed to see. A man seated alone near the rear wall hadn't touched the espresso cooling beside him. He wasn't studying the wine list. He wasn't admiring the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. His attention drifted only once every few seconds, always toward the same table. Toward Adrian Romano. Most people in New York recognized Adrian without ever admitting it aloud. His tailored charcoal suit, composed posture, and quiet confidence carried the unmistakable presence of a man accustomed to making impossible decisions without raising his voice. Tonight he appeared to be having an ordinary business dinner, speaking little while three associates handled most of the conversation. Nothing about the evening suggested danger. Everything about the stranger did. Claire had waited tables for almost 4 years. She had learned to read people through tiny details customers never realized they revealed. Nervous fingers. Shoes pointing toward exits. Watches checked too often. This man showed none of those habits. Instead, he displayed something far more unsettling. Patience. The kind that settled over a room like winter air. When he shifted slightly, the sleeve of his jacket lifted just enough for Claire to recognize a small symbol tattooed near his wrist. Her heartbeat stumbled. She had seen that mark once before, years ago, in a photograph investigators had shown her family after her father's death. She never forgot it. She never expected to see it again. Walking toward Adrian's table, Claire knew shouting would only turn every head in the restaurant. Calling security might alert the stranger before anyone could react. Looking directly at Adrian could expose everything. She needed a warning hidden inside something completely ordinary. At the service station she pulled a pen from her apron, flipped over the printed receipt, and wrote 6 words with careful, unwavering handwriting. Gunman behind you. Don't turn around. She slipped the receipt beneath the dinner bill, closed the folder, and continued forward without changing her pace. The soft music continued. Silverware chimed against fine china. A server nearby laughed politely at a customer's joke. No one noticed the difference between one waitress carrying a check and another finishing a bottle of sparkling water. Claire stopped beside Adrian's chair, placed the leather folder beside his plate, and quietly wished him a pleasant evening. Adrian thanked her with a brief nod before opening it. His eyes dropped to the receipt. For the smallest fraction of a second, time itself seemed to hesitate. Then, without lifting his head, without turning his shoulders, and without changing the calm expression on his face, Adrian Romano read every single word. Adrian Romano did not blink, did not shift in his chair, and did not allow even the smallest crack to appear in the calm expression that had made rivals underestimate him exactly once. Around him, conversations continued beneath the warm glow of antique chandeliers, waiters carried polished silver trays across the dining room, and a jazz trio filled the air with soft piano and brushed drums. Anyone watching would have believed he had simply opened another routine dinner check. Claire Bennett lowered her eyes and walked away at the same measured pace she had practiced every evening since her first shift at Bella Rosa. She knew the most dangerous moment was never after a warning. It was the few seconds before anyone realized one had been given. 6 months earlier, Claire had arrived in Manhattan with 2 suitcases, a dependable sedan that barely survived the drive from Ohio, and exactly $384 left after paying her first month's rent. Bella Rosa had been the 3rd restaurant where she interviewed, and the first manager willing to overlook her lack of fine dining experience. She learned quickly. She memorized every wine on the menu, every allergy protocol, every regular customer who preferred sparkling water over still water, and every unwritten rule about serving powerful people. Smile. Stay invisible. Never interrupt a private conversation. Never assume wealthy guests wanted anything beyond excellent service. Claire followed those rules because they kept her employed. Her coworkers described her as dependable but quiet. She traded weekend parties for double shifts, skipped expensive coffee shops, and sent part of every paycheck to her mother back home. No one knew that she still carried an old newspaper clipping inside her apartment dresser, folded so many times the edges had become soft. It was the only article ever written about her father. The official report had called his death an unsolved case. Claire had stopped believing that word years ago. Some memories refused to fade, especially one photograph shown during the investigation. An investigator had pointed toward a small symbol visible on someone's wrist in the corner of the image. At the time it had seemed meaningless. Claire had stared at it until it became impossible to forget. Tonight, while pouring mineral water into a crystal glass near the back of the restaurant, she saw the same symbol appear beneath the cuff of a customer's jacket. The room around her seemed to lose every sound for a single heartbeat. She nearly convinced herself she was mistaken. Then the stranger adjusted his sleeve again, revealing the mark a second time. There was no mistake. Fear settled quietly inside her, but something stronger rose beside it. She remembered her father's voice telling her that courage was rarely loud. Most of the time it looked like an ordinary person making one impossible decision because nobody else could. As Claire collected empty appetizer plates from another table, she resisted every instinct to keep walking, to pretend she had seen nothing, to protect only herself. Instead, she chose the one path that offered a stranger a chance while placing herself directly in the middle of consequences she could not possibly predict. Across the dining room, Adrian slowly closed the leather folder, lifted his water glass with steady fingers, and gave the slightest nod toward the reflection in the restaurant window, a gesture so subtle that only someone trained to notice the smallest details would have understood its meaning. The reflection in the restaurant window became more valuable than any security camera. Adrian Romano lifted his glass just high enough to study the room without ever looking behind him. The polished glass revealed fragments instead of complete pictures. Candlelight shimmered across crystal. A couple celebrated an anniversary near the fireplace. A businessman signed a receipt with slow confidence. Then there was the man seated alone. He remained perfectly still. No meal. No conversation. No distraction. Adrian noticed the same detail Claire had noticed. Patience. Across the dining room, Claire continued serving tables exactly as she had all evening. She refilled iced tea for a family visiting from Connecticut, recommended a lemon tart to an elderly couple celebrating 50 years of marriage, and smiled politely when another guest asked for fresh bread. To everyone else, she looked like another hardworking waitress finishing a busy dinner service. Inside, every passing second tightened the knot in her chest. She wondered if Adrian believed her. She wondered if she had misunderstood everything. Fear had a way of making ordinary moments seem extraordinary. But every time she glanced toward the stranger without appearing to look, the same feeling returned. Something was terribly wrong. Adrian rested the check presenter beside his plate and casually adjusted the silver watch on his wrist. One of his associates immediately excused himself to answer what appeared to be a telephone call. Another requested a fresh bottle of sparkling water, creating a natural reason for one of the security professionals stationed outside the dining room to enter without drawing attention. Nothing happened by accident around Adrian Romano. Years of surviving impossible situations had taught him that panic invited mistakes, while patience created opportunities. Claire watched these tiny changes unfold and realized he had understood every word she wrote. Relief lasted only a moment before another thought entered her mind. If Adrian was preparing quietly, then the stranger might be watching just as carefully. She carried a tray toward the service station and deliberately slowed near the solitary customer. His untouched espresso had gone cold. A folded newspaper rested beside his plate, although he had never turned a page. His eyes drifted toward Adrian once more before settling on the dessert menu that he clearly was not reading. Then his fingers tapped the edge of the table exactly 3 times. Claire froze for the smallest fraction of a second. The rhythm stirred another distant memory from the investigation years earlier. One detective had described certain groups using harmless gestures to signal timing without speaking. She had dismissed it then as background information that would never matter. Tonight it echoed inside her mind with unsettling clarity. She stepped away before her hesitation became noticeable, but now she understood something she had not realized before. The man was not waiting for confidence. He was waiting for a signal. Adrian slowly folded his linen napkin and placed it beside his dinner plate with the same calm precision he had shown since arriving. His expression never changed, yet his instincts told him the quietest person in the room had just become the most important one. And for reasons neither of them could fully explain, his survival now depended as much upon the courage of an ordinary waitress as upon the experience of every trusted person surrounding him. Claire Bennett carried a tray of freshly prepared desserts through the dining room with hands that appeared perfectly steady, although every instinct urged her to leave the restaurant before the invisible tension finally broke. The stranger still had not touched his coffee. Adrian Romano still had not looked behind him. Yet the atmosphere had changed in ways ordinary guests would never notice. One of Adrian's associates had returned from his telephone call with the same relaxed smile, but his chair now faced the entrance instead of the dining table. A server Claire had never seen before quietly replaced another employee near the hallway leading toward the private rooms. Even the restaurant manager, who normally floated from table to table greeting guests, remained unusually close to the front entrance while pretending to discuss tomorrow's reservations. The room continued to breathe as though nothing had changed, but beneath that calm surface every movement felt measured. Claire placed a slice of cheesecake before a young couple celebrating an engagement, accepted their thanks with a gentle smile, and stepped away before allowing herself another careful glance across the room. The solitary customer finally moved. Not much. Only enough to adjust the folded newspaper beside his plate. As he did, another man entered through the main doors wearing a dark sports coat and carrying a small shopping bag from an expensive department store. He looked like any other late-evening customer hoping to enjoy dessert before closing. He paused only briefly before taking a seat near the windows. Claire noticed something that no one else appeared to recognize. The first stranger tapped his fingertips against the table once. The newcomer responded by placing the shopping bag on the floor with deliberate precision. They never exchanged eye contact. They did not need to. Claire suddenly understood that she had been watching only part of the picture. Whatever was unfolding involved more than one person. A chill traveled across her shoulders despite the warmth of the dining room. She slipped behind the service station and quietly reached for the order tablet, pretending to review pending requests while giving herself a moment to think. Every reasonable choice pointed toward finding the manager, but she could not risk speaking openly if the wrong person overheard. Every second mattered now. Across the room Adrian accepted a fresh glass of sparkling water from another server. As the glass touched the white linen tablecloth, he caught Claire's reflection in the polished silver wine bucket beside him. Their eyes never met directly, yet he recognized the concern written across her face. It was different from fear. Fear searched for escape. This expression searched for answers. Adrian slowly lifted his glass and rotated it once between his fingers, a habit so ordinary that none of the surrounding guests noticed. One member of his security team quietly adjusted his jacket and walked toward the hallway leading to the kitchen without urgency. Claire understood immediately. He was giving everyone one last chance to leave peacefully before whatever came next revealed itself. She drew a slow breath, straightened her apron, and stepped back onto the dining room floor, silently hoping that courage, once again, would be enough to change the course of a night that already felt destined to be remembered forever. Adrian Romano set his water glass back onto the table with unhurried precision, as though the evening had unfolded exactly as expected. His associates continued their conversation about real estate investments and shipping contracts, each sentence delivered naturally enough to satisfy anyone listening nearby. Yet beneath every ordinary word lay silent coordination. Claire Bennett moved between tables carrying a fresh pot of coffee, her attention divided between smiling at customers and reading the smallest changes inside the room. The man near the rear wall had stopped tapping his fingers. The newcomer by the windows had unfolded his napkin without ordering a single item. Neither appeared impatient. That unsettled her more than anything else. People planning to leave usually checked the time. These men seemed willing to wait as long as necessary. Claire stopped beside an elderly couple and carefully refilled their coffee cups. The husband thanked her warmly, mentioning that the cheesecake reminded him of the one he and his wife shared on their honeymoon more than 40 years earlier. Claire smiled sincerely, wishing for one ordinary conversation to remain untouched by whatever storm was quietly gathering around them. As she stepped away, she noticed Adrian casually slide his chair back an inch, creating a slightly wider path between his table and the nearest aisle. Such a small adjustment meant nothing to everyone else. To Claire, it looked deliberate. It was another move in a conversation taking place without words. The restaurant manager approached Adrian's table with an apologetic smile and quietly explained that a complimentary dessert was being prepared for all guests because the kitchen was testing a new seasonal recipe. Several customers welcomed the unexpected surprise. Others laughed and thanked the staff. Within moments, servers politely encouraged nearly every occupied table to accept dessert in the lounge area overlooking the skyline while the dining room was briefly reorganized. The explanation sounded reasonable. No one questioned it. Families gathered their belongings. Business travelers finished their drinks. Couples wandered toward the lounge, delighted by the unexpected hospitality. Claire finally understood the purpose. Adrian was emptying the room without alarming anyone. It was the safest decision he could make. The dining room gradually became quieter, but two guests never moved. The solitary man remained beside his untouched espresso. The newcomer by the windows politely declined dessert with a calm smile that never reached his eyes. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken again. Whatever signal they had been waiting for had not changed simply because the room had become less crowded. Adrian noticed the same thing. He thanked the manager, folded his napkin once more, and rose from his chair as though preparing to conclude an uneventful business dinner. His associates stood with him in perfect rhythm. No hurried movements. No anxious expressions. Only quiet confidence. Claire collected empty plates from a nearby table, placing herself close enough to observe without drawing attention. As she reached for the final plate, she caught a reflection in the polished silver coffee urn. The two strangers were no longer watching Adrian alone. For the first time that evening, they were watching her. A single realization settled over Claire with unmistakable clarity. The note she had written had protected one man, but it had also revealed that someone inside the restaurant had seen far more than she ever should have, and from that moment forward, she was no longer an invisible waitress serving dinner. She had become part of the story herself. Claire Bennett kept her eyes on the stack of dessert plates in her hands even after she realized the two strangers had begun watching her instead of Adrian Romano. The instinct to run flashed through her mind, but years of balancing heavy trays through crowded dining rooms had taught her one lesson above all others. Sudden movements attracted attention. Calm movements disappeared into the background. She walked toward the kitchen entrance at the same unhurried pace, greeted another server with a polite smile, and placed the empty plates onto the service counter before quietly drawing a steady breath. The restaurant remained wrapped in soft piano music, the scent of fresh bread, and the gentle murmur of guests enjoying the complimentary desserts in the lounge. To anyone arriving at that moment, Bella Rosa still looked like one of the safest places in Manhattan. Adrian buttoned his charcoal suit jacket and thanked his associates for the evening as though their meeting had reached its natural conclusion. His voice remained even, but his attention never stopped measuring the room through reflections in polished glass, silver serving trays, and darkened windows. Experience had taught him that danger often appeared most ordinary just before revealing itself. One of his associates casually excused himself to retrieve a coat from the front entrance. Another paused near the host stand to compliment the restaurant manager on the evening service. Every position they chose quietly reduced uncertainty without creating fear among the remaining guests. Claire stepped back into the dining room carrying a fresh pitcher of ice water. The solitary customer finally rose from his chair, leaving the untouched espresso exactly where it had been since arriving. He adjusted his jacket, smiled politely at a passing couple, and began walking toward the exit with the relaxed confidence of someone ending a pleasant dinner. At nearly the same moment, the newcomer near the windows also stood, lifting the shopping bag from the floor before moving toward the opposite side of the room. Their timing felt too perfect to be accidental. Instead of crossing paths, they widened the distance between themselves, almost as if creating space for something unseen. Claire noticed. Adrian noticed the same pattern. Without speaking, he turned toward the restaurant manager and thanked him personally for the excellent hospitality, lingering just long enough to delay his own departure by a few quiet seconds. Those seconds changed everything. A third man entered through the revolving front door wearing the dark blue uniform of a package delivery driver carrying a medium-sized cardboard box with an official shipping label attached to the top. He apologized politely for arriving so late and explained that a customer had requested immediate delivery before leaving the restaurant. The explanation sounded completely believable, and several people barely looked up from their conversations. Claire did. The delivery driver never glanced at the host stand to confirm a name. Instead, his eyes searched directly for Adrian. In that instant Claire understood the strangers had never been acting independently. They were distracting everyone while waiting for someone else to arrive. Adrian saw the delivery driver at the exact same moment, and although neither he nor Claire exchanged a single word, both understood that the quiet game of observation had reached its decisive move, and whatever happened next would depend not upon strength or intimidation, but upon who remained calm the longest. The delivery driver stopped a respectful distance from Adrian Romano and offered a courteous smile that would have seemed completely ordinary to anyone who had entered the restaurant only moments before. The medium-sized box rested comfortably in his hands, its shipping label crisp and convincing beneath the warm dining room lights. Adrian returned the smile with equal calm but made no effort to reach for the package. Around them, the remaining guests continued enjoying coffee and dessert, unaware that nearly everyone else had already drifted into the lounge overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Claire Bennett stood near the service station holding a polished silver water pitcher, watching every tiny movement reflected across the mirrored wine display behind the bar. The driver spoke first, explaining that an assistant had requested the delivery be completed before the end of the evening. Adrian thanked him politely and replied that none of his staff had mentioned an expected package. The conversation sounded so natural that nearby diners barely noticed it. Yet Claire saw something that instantly tightened the knot in her stomach. The driver answered Adrian's question without ever looking surprised. It was as though he had expected the response before hearing it. Across the room, the two men who had quietly observed Adrian all evening remained perfectly positioned near separate exits. They did not move closer. They did not leave. They simply waited. Claire remembered another detail from the old investigation into her father's death. One detective had once explained that complicated plans rarely depended upon one person. They depended upon distractions, patience, and perfect timing. Standing there with the silver pitcher in her hands, she suddenly realized the package itself might never have been the true objective. It was the conversation. It was the pause. It was giving everyone else something harmless to watch while another piece quietly slid into place. Adrian seemed to reach the same conclusion. Rather than accepting the box, he glanced toward the restaurant manager and thanked him again for the exceptional evening, deliberately shifting the focus away from himself. The manager stepped forward with professional courtesy, offering to verify the delivery information before any package changed hands. The driver nodded without hesitation and willingly surrendered the box. The gesture looked cooperative, but Claire noticed the faintest flicker of disappointment pass across his face before disappearing beneath another polite smile. Within seconds, one of Adrian's security professionals approached as though simply assisting with an administrative misunderstanding. No raised voices interrupted the dining room. No frightened guests rushed toward the exits. The manager apologized for the inconvenience and invited the driver to wait comfortably near the reception desk while the paperwork was confirmed. The man agreed. So did the two quiet observers, who unexpectedly decided that their coffee was finished and calmly walked toward the front entrance. They disappeared into the Manhattan night without a single hurried step. Only after the revolving door settled back into place did the pressure inside the restaurant begin to ease. Claire slowly released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Adrian turned toward her for the first time that evening, not as a powerful businessman acknowledging another employee, but as one human being recognizing another. He offered the smallest nod of gratitude, and in that silent moment Claire understood that sometimes the greatest act of courage was not defeating danger, but noticing it early enough that everyone else could walk away believing nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The restaurant finally returned to its familiar rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same to Claire Bennett. The last guests finished their desserts, the jazz trio packed away their instruments, and the glow of Manhattan shimmered beyond the tall windows as though the city had quietly decided to keep its secrets for one more night. Employees cleared tables, polished silverware, and prepared for closing without realizing how close the evening had come to becoming something entirely different. Claire carried empty glasses back to the kitchen, still replaying every decision she had made since noticing the unfamiliar symbol on a stranger's wrist. Doubt slowly crept into the silence. Had she imagined connections that were never truly there, or had one handwritten message changed the direction of countless lives? Before she could answer herself, the restaurant manager approached with an unusually serious expression and asked if she could spare a few minutes after her shift. Claire nodded politely, expecting questions about the unusual delivery or perhaps a customer complaint. Instead, she found Adrian Romano waiting alone in one of the private dining rooms. The expensive suit, the composed posture, and the quiet confidence remained exactly the same, but something about his expression had changed. It no longer carried the distance of a powerful man speaking to an employee. It carried genuine curiosity. Adrian thanked her for staying and gently placed the folded dinner receipt on the polished wooden table between them. The ink had begun to fade where his fingers had held it earlier, yet every word remained perfectly readable. He asked only one question. "How did you know?" Claire remained silent for several seconds before answering with complete honesty. She explained that years earlier her father had died under circumstances that were never fully explained. During the investigation she had seen a photograph containing a small symbol near someone's wrist. Most people forgot details like that. She never had. When she noticed the same mark inside Bella Rosa, every memory returned at once. Adrian listened without interrupting. He asked no unnecessary questions and offered no empty sympathy. When she finished, he simply nodded, understanding that some experiences shaped a person long after everyone else believed the story had ended. He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. Claire did not open it. She quietly slid it back toward him and thanked him for the gesture before explaining that she had not acted for money, recognition, or gratitude. She had acted because ignoring what she saw would have haunted her for the rest of her life. Adrian studied her for a long moment before allowing a faint smile to appear. In a world where nearly every favor carried a price, her answer surprised him more than the warning itself. As Claire stood to leave, Adrian carefully folded the receipt once again and slipped it into his wallet instead of throwing it away. It was only a small piece of paper, yet to him it had become proof that wisdom could arrive wearing an ordinary apron, that courage often spoke in the quietest voice, and that the most valuable debt a person could ever owe was one that could never truly be repaid. 3 months passed, and Bella Rosa settled back into the familiar rhythm that had defined it long before one unforgettable evening quietly altered the lives of two strangers. Claire Bennett continued working double shifts, greeting every customer with the same warm professionalism that had earned the respect of her coworkers. She still drove the same dependable sedan, still mailed part of every paycheck to her mother in Ohio, and still preferred leaving through the employee entrance after closing because the cool Manhattan air gave her a few peaceful minutes before heading home. Nothing about her daily routine suggested that she had become part of a story almost no one would ever know. Adrian Romano never spoke publicly about what had happened that night. His associates noticed only one small change. Whenever business meetings were scheduled at restaurants, Adrian paid closer attention to the people serving the tables than to the people trying to impress him. He greeted hosts by name, thanked busboys for clearing plates, and never allowed anyone in his presence to dismiss waiters or waitresses as invisible. Those who knew him best assumed experience had simply made him more observant. Only Adrian understood the truth. Respect had become more valuable than appearances because one ordinary waitress had reminded him that wisdom did not always arrive wearing an expensive suit. One quiet Tuesday evening, Adrian returned to Bella Rosa alone. The hostess recognized him immediately and escorted him to the same table beside the windows where the city lights reflected across the glass like scattered stars. A few minutes later Claire approached with a menu, stopping briefly when she realized who her guest was. Adrian smiled first, making the moment wonderfully ordinary. He ordered the restaurant's signature pasta, sparkling water with lemon, and the same chocolate dessert he had never reached on that unforgettable night. They exchanged only a few polite words, exactly as any server and customer might. No one around them noticed anything unusual. As dinner ended, Claire placed the leather check presenter beside his plate with the same calm professionalism she showed every guest. Adrian opened it slowly. Inside rested the printed receipt, and beneath it was a handwritten note in familiar, careful handwriting. "Dessert is on the house." Adrian looked toward Claire. She simply smiled and continued serving another table before he could respond. There was no dramatic speech, no celebration, and no audience waiting to applaud. There was only a quiet understanding shared between two people whose lives had briefly crossed at exactly the right moment. Adrian folded the small note with the same care he had shown months earlier and slipped it beside the first receipt that still rested safely inside his wallet. Some people collected photographs. Others collected awards. He chose to keep two pieces of paper because they reminded him of something far more valuable than success. They reminded him that courage often looked ordinary, that dignity could never be measured by a job title, and that the people the world noticed the least sometimes changed another person's future the most. And on that quiet evening in Manhattan, without applause or recognition, the world once again remembered what true dignity looks like.